Be the Vibe Radio, Season 6, Episode 10.
Wow, your face really.
Yes, she's obsessed.
Well, obsessed. Like now you have to show them to me. Come on, show them to me. You have to show them to me. Let me see.
Hello, and welcome to Be the Vibe Radio, where we have real life discussions about real life experiences. Be the Vibe Radio is an educational podcast that promotes liberation through spirituality. I am your host, Latoya Thurman. So, welcome to another episode of Be the Vibe Radio with your hostess, Latoya Thurman, aka Chrysalis Sun. It is January 20th, 2025. It is MLK Day. It is Inauguration Day. It is a very weird day. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So today the energy has just been a little weird, a little eerie, a little off. I did know that when I woke up, I wanted to record something, but I was just like, okay, well, let me get my day started. I'm off, obviously, and the baby is not in daycare. So I'm actually sneaking and recording this episode while Nugget is taking a nap. So hopefully he holds out during me recording this so I can get this done. But yeah, I just decided to do a little gardening, do some meditation, some grounding, and then it came to me what I wanted to discuss. So today's topic is something that I'm actually revisiting. I'm doubling back. I'm spinning the block on this one because this is a conversation. This is a topic that honestly I have not talked about in the last like 5-6 years, right? Both on YouTube, which this episode will be on YouTube for those of you who are listening on Spotify. But yeah, I haven't talked about this. I haven't revisited this topic in several years. And also for those of you who've been following the podcast, this topic was one of like my very few first episodes. I want to say like season 1. Now, mind you, we're in season 6. So, and again, 6 years, I have not talked about this on the podcast. 6 years, I have not talked about this on YouTube. And what that topic is ancestor veneration. So I want to revisit a conversation around ancestor veneration. And the reason why I want to revisit it is because one, venerating our ancestors are going to be something, just communication with our ancestors in general is going to be something that is going to be extremely important this year, probably these next 4 years. So it is an important practice that needs to be cultivated, especially now, but also because my practice has changed a lot since I first discussed this all those years ago. So I want to share just kind of where I am now, and my evolution within my practice of ancestor veneration, and then talking about why, stressing again why it's so important. That's the topic today. Revisiting ancestor veneration. So I want to start this episode off by just sharing my journey with ancestor veneration. So I want to talk about what it looked like when I first started this practice and what it's evolved into. So when I first started this practice, I knew nothing about ancestor veneration other than, like going to like the Asian markets and seeing like the little shrines for the ancestors and things like that. It wasn't really something that I considered to be like a practice that I would pick up. So until I moved to Atlanta. So, and honestly, a lot of my spiritual practice shifted a lot when I moved to Georgia, because Georgia really is a hub. It is a magnet for spiritual people. And so it is common that for those who relocate here, like there's something about this place that drastically changes, your spirituality. It drastically changes it. So when I moved here, and this was like 10 years ago, I met someone who was an astrologer, and I was partnering with them on events and things like that. And when I went to go visit him for the first time, he had this beautiful shrine, ancestor shrine, in like a day room. So he had like a separate like sunroom of his house that was this beautiful set up, and it was like for his ancestors. And this person, he was a Tai Chi practitioner, and he studied with a lot of like Asian masters. So his shrine was set up and tended to in more of like Asian, like a tradition of an Asian tradition versus an African tradition. But nonetheless, I just found it to be really beautiful. Every day he would go light his incense, say his prayers. He would put food out for his ancestors and all of that. And so me seeing that, it was something that it resonated with me. And so it was something that I wanted to incorporate into my own practice. Now, at the time, my only practice was yoga and meditation. I was practicing Buddhism. So I was like, it felt right. It made sense. It was something I wanted to do. So I had him teach me how to set up an altar, how to tend to it. And it was very, very basic, just pictures of my ancestors on a table. Well, really a shelf, because when I moved into my own apartment, my own place, they wanted to be like up on a shelf. So I put them on a shelf, pictures, water, candles, prayers, food offerings. Very simple, right? And then I did that for quite a bit. I did that for quite a bit of time. I want to say almost a year before things started shifting for me as far as dreams I was having, messages I was getting. That practice, that ancestor veneration, that very, very simple beginners ancestor veneration practice I had really morphed, right? It increased my spiritual gifts, my psychic abilities. It increased my direct communication with my ancestors. I started dreaming about them. They started, telling me, showing me like what type of offerings to give, what type of prayers to do, things like that. And that connection just really deepened. And I think it was so impactful for me because when I first started doing my ancestor veneration, I had a very I didn't have any expectations. Like I didn't have any expectations around an outcome. It was only just me wanting to really connect with my ancestors and heal certain aspects of my lineage. So I burned a lot of ancestor money. I did a lot of prayers and rituals around healing, like healing health issues, healing generations of poverty, generations of instability. And so it was just me and my ancestors and elevating and doing a lot of work with them. And that was it. I didn't have any expectations of any outcomes. I didn't know where it was going to lead. And I think the lack of expectation and just the consistency and the desire to just really kind of deep dive into that practice is actually what caused helped my practice to just blossom the way that it did. So eventually it opened the door for other things. I started having dreams about Orisha. I didn't know it was Orisha. I've talked about this in previous podcast episodes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, because this is going to be posted on YouTube as well, I haven't shared my updates with y'all about where I've been and what I've been into these last several years. But I think I'm going to do a whole separate YouTube episode just for my subscribers there to just share like my whole journey of between the last time I posted something and now. So that's a sidebar. But anyways, it did open up the door for Ocha, for Risha practice. It opened the door for Espiritismo, which I am going to discuss what that is and why that is also important. And it opened the door for me to learn more about what my ancestors did and what they practiced. It brought me a better understanding of church, because most of us who are African American and have African American ancestry grew up in a Christian church, and so my ancestors went through that practice, and through that relationship that I built with them provided me a deeper understanding of the power behind going to church and the magic behind that, which I'm probably going to make that a separate episode as well. So there was that. It was also I learned that I have an ancestor. I have a lot of Caribbean ancestors, so I learned that too. Ancestors that are connected to Haiti, ancestors that are connected to like Trinidad, and so I learned it opened the door for me to reconnect with like Haitian voodoo, and reintroduce that practice. And so that's what it all led to, right? But in the beginning, it started off being a very, very, very simple practice. Like, again, pictures of my ancestors, prayers, water, candles, flowers, food offerings, burning ancestor money, constant, singing, all of that, right? And so, yes, it opened the door for a lot of other things. And in the midst of where I'm at now, which is now, it opened the door for me to get initiated into Lukumi, which is a, Risha worship. I got initiated, I got crowned as a priestess of Yemaya. It introduced me to Haitian voodoo. It introduced me to other initiations as well. It also opened the door for me to tap into the practice of spiritism. But even within all those practices, they still double back to ancestor veneration, right? Um, and so it, no matter what you do, no matter what you practice, it's all going to come back to your bloodline. So let's talk about bloodline, right? Let's talk about what that means and why that's important. So I am a medium. I do readings. For those who've been following me for a while, you know that I do mediumship. I do tarot readings, and I'm heavy on ancestor readings as well. And what I find is that a lot of people are misaligned. A lot of people come to me and they're wanting to get into certain practices, certain spiritual religious traditions. And when I tap into their ancestors, I tap into their spiritual court, what they're wanting to get into doesn't align. And so I'm having to tell them, okay, I know you're interested in this, but then from what I'm seeing and your people are showing me, you may want to get into this other thing. You may want to explore this other thing. You may want to be open to this other thing. And I know I have a variety of people who tune into my podcast, but I want to, in this instance, in this moment, speak specifically to African Americans. A lot of our history here has been around erasure. Erasure of where we come from, our traditions, our religions, our spirituality, and also our customs. And a lot of what our customs have been tribal, meaning that we're not a monolith, right? When our ancestors were brought here, they were coming from tribes that were broken into sub-tribes that were broken into sub-tribes, right? And even today, when you go to different parts of Africa, different African countries, you'll go into these villages or these towns or these cities, and yes, you will see Africans there, and you will hear multiple languages being spoken, multiple tribes being represented, right? That's still deep in our DNA. And in addition to that, what that also means is that what we practiced was not a monolith, and we can't treat it as though it is currently, right? And the reason why this is important is because if we take the time to actually find out and study and connect with where we come from, it would eliminate a lot of misalignment. It would also eliminate a lot of spiritual tragedies, right? people who get into certain practices that are not for them, and it completely throws their spiritual court, their ancestors out of whack, and then it creates all kinds of havoc in their lives. And I want to say this too. It has been my experience that whatever you get into, whatever you practice, should improve your life, your circumstances, and improve your character. And if it does not, you need to examine or question two things. First, you need to question whether or not you are practicing that tradition to the best of your ability, right? Are you following things as best you can? Are you interpreting things as best you can? Um, and if you feel like you are, or you find that you are, then you need to ask yourself the second question. Um, is this practice in alignment with my bloodline? Is this practice in alignment with me? Okay. Because there's too many times where people get into stuff and they get initiations, they get, different things, and it makes their life absolutely worse. And part of it is that, people are people and they make bad decisions. And so that also contributes to us. These practices are not like they're not just gonna just magically make all our problems disappear, right? But they are supposed to bring things into alignment. And so if they don't, it's either the practitioner or the person that's not doing right, or the person is doing right but they're in the wrong tradition. And the whole way to avoid all that altogether is to make sure that you're getting into something that aligns with your bloodline. And a lot of times our ancestors will warn us, they'll tell us, but we're so lost in the sauce that and determined to do what we want to do anyway, that we don't even we ignore the signs. We completely ignore the signs. I've been now a victim of that. I won't say a victim, but I've done that. Being stubborn and then finally having to just sit my ass down. But also, I've seen other people do it, where it's like they've been told, no, this is not your path, and they're just determined to walk that path anyway. Then they come back and their life's in shambles and they're wanting people to fix it. And it's like, no, you were told. So I say all that to say that everything comes back to your bloodline. You know, being connected to your bloodline, being connected to your ancestors, it keeps you aligned and on track, both spiritually and with your destiny, what your mission is, what you came here to do. It keeps you out of practices that you don't belong in. It keeps you from appropriating practices that you don't belong in. And this applies to everybody. This also applies to white people, because, too many times I see white people wanting to co-opt practices that are not for that their ancestors have absolutely no connection to. And I'm like, I don't understand it, because there's different there's different cultures of white people that have their own spiritual practices, their own folk magic that is beautiful and it works for them. And it's like, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you doing that? So yeah, it keeps us out of practices that we don't belong in. It keeps us from appropriating practices. It keeps us, and when we stay out of practices that don't belong to us, it also means that we're not pissing off the spirits that are connected to those practices as well. It also allows for multi-generational healing, which, it's so important. It's so important, particularly for African Americans and our history here in the United States, in the diaspora. We need that connection to our ancestors, because it was purposely stripped from us and systematically in so many ways. And a lot of us are lost because of that. A lot of us have reoccurring generational issues and curses because of that. And yes, we can do cord cuttings, and we can do cleanses, and we can do initiations, and we can do all these things, but none of that matters if we're not addressing our ancestors, because ultimately a lot of that trauma and a lot of those things that are going on are locked in our DNA. So essentially us venerating our ancestors and tending to them is also So I want to talk about what ancestor veneration is and what it isn't, because even though this is something that I have been on with my own personal journey, as well as teaching other people how to uh, set up their ancestor altars, give offerings, connect with their ancestors, etc. There's still a lot of misconceptions. Even though I do see a lot more people talking about ancestor veneration. Now it's a lot more popular. It's a lot more kind of a mainstream conversation than it was when I started. There's still a lot of misconceptions around it. So I do want to discuss like what it is and what it isn't. First of all, we are not worshiping our ancestors, right? And when I say ancestors too, I mean members of our bloodline, our family that have passed on. Now I do want to say this too. There is a lot of debate as to whether or not we add extended family, adopted family, etc. And I do see a lot of people priests who are in Africa who speak against this, but particularly for blacks in the diaspora, um, it is very important for us to include extended family and adopted family into our ancestor veneration because, again, of our history. Africans don't have the history of broken families that we do here in the diaspora. And so a lot of people ask me, like, oh, do I add my extended family? Do I add my stepmom, my step grandma, whoever? Yes. Yes, even friends of family. I have friends who passed away, recently, that when there's readings and things that I get, they show up in my readings as part of my court. So that was a sidebar. So yeah, but again, we're not worshiping these people, right? We are acknowledging them. We're giving honor to them. We are not allowing ourselves to forget them. We are elevating them. We are healing them on a spiritual level. We are helping them to cross over. Helping them gain peace, gain rest, helping their souls. They are in turn helping us, and whatnot. And so it's a relationship. It's a relationship. This is not something where we don't command our ancestors. That's another thing. Like, we go to them for help for different things, but we don't go in and treat them like they work for us. Like they're our employees and whatnot. No, it's not like that. They're your bloodline, your people. So the same way you treated them and you interact with them when you were alive is the same way that when they were alive is the same way that you interact and treat them, when on the other side, right? So it is a relationship, and it's not something where you're above them or they're above you. It is a mutual interdependent relationship. And again, we're not worshiping them, right? There's no there's no idols involved in this practice, right? It is very much an indigenous practice. Every indigenous culture has some form of ritual or reverence, or devotional that they do with their ancestors. Um, and I think that's another reason why it's so important to participate in ancestor veneration, because it is grounding. It definitely connects you with the earth. It connects you with the very just basic nature of spirituality. It's not something that has to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be, all these things that you have to do, and that's another reason why I appreciate the practice as well, because it's like it could be as simple as a prayer in a glass of water and a candle. It could be as simple as going outside to your backyard, to your tree, and pouring libations to the tree. It could be something as simple as going to a grave site, visiting, a deceased family at their grave, and bringing flowers and some cookies that were their favorite cookies, right? But again, it's simple, and it's very, very, very indigenous in nature, and so it brings us kind of back. It scales us back to just like the very basics of connecting with spirit. Also, ancestor veneration is non-denominational. It can be you can venerate your ancestors no matter what other practice or religion that you're into. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people, especially Black folks, we venerate our ancestors without a lot of times without even realizing that's what we're doing. I've discussed the ways in which we've done that in other episodes, but honoring our people is very much an important and integral part of our culture. And so we do it without even realizing it. And so because of that, it being, such a deeply rooted thing and a cultural thing, and again, it's not a worship, it is just an acknowledgement of our ancestors. You don't need to drop another religion or just because you venerate your ancestors doesn't mean you can't go to church, that you can't go to an Orisha drumming, or or you can't give offerings to your luau, whatever else you practice, right? um Especially because a lot of those African traditional religions also incorporate ancestor veneration. So yeah, it can be practiced no matter what. And then the other thing I want to say as a sidebar is that, and I see this a lot, people who post things and they'll say, your ancestors are evil, and worship, venerating your ancestors is worshiping the devil and it's devil work. And it's like, so okay, if I'm over here and I'm saying prayers to my grandmother who's deceased, are you saying that my grandmother is a devil? Like, these are your family. They were alive at some point. So it's like, so what, they die and all of a sudden they become the devil because now you want to light a candle to them? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? So when we're into these practices, we really have to approach it from a very logical standpoint and can critically think. And again, it is a whole separate practice. Again, meaning that you can venerate your ancestors and you can go to church. You can venerate your ancestors and you can go and to go to a Risha ceremony. You can venerate your ancestors and you can go, meditate at the Buddhist temple. Like it works, and it works in alignment with anything. So another thing too is that I want to say is that at this point, ancestor veneration is not optional. It is not optional. It is something that we absolutely must do, because and I could probably do a whole separate episode about this, and I guess I'm having about 3-4 side quests episodes out of this one. But a lot of the readings of the year, if are into Orisha, and you follow, like, they do the letter of the year, reading of the year every year, as well as just for those of, like, I attend misas and things like that. So a lot of things that Orisha has said, and a lot of things that, like, the dead spirits have come down and said, has been around the importance of giving offerings and honoring your dead, your ancestors, right? Your egun is what they call it. And so, and I think the reason why is because when I look at what's going on socially and politically, and again, I addressed this in a previous video about a reckoning going on. There is a lot of atonement that needs to happen in regards to how certain groups have treated other groups for centuries, as well as how we have collectively treated this earth. And a lot of people don't really pay attention to the fact that, or really understand that the earth is, yes, the earth is its own energy, it's its own entity, but then there are spirits that are attached and connected to different parts of earth. There's spirits connected to water, there's spirits that are connected to mountains, there's spirits that are connected to land, dirt, there's spirits that are connected to plants, and then there's spirits that are that are the dead, that roam the earth for whatever various reasons. And so my point is that a lot of these spirits are angry. They're angry. The spirits that are connected to earth are angry about how we've treated earth. Spirits that are dead, the dead that still walk amongst us, a lot of them have died through violence. genocides, things like that. I know living in Georgia, especially here in Atlanta, Atlanta was a site for the Civil War. And so, this is a place where, first of all, you dig up anything in Atlanta and you are likely to find a mass grave of either soldiers or, enslaved people who, were buried without grave markers and things like that. That's a thing. You also find a lot of bullets and weapons from battles that were fought here during the Civil War. There's a lot of blood in the earth here in Georgia. And so you can feel and hear and sense a lot of those spirits, and they're angry. They're angry. You know what I'm saying? And they need to be appeased. And so a lot of these shakeups that are happening socially and politically, as well as in nature, are from these spirits. And the only way to really settle them is to start to acknowledge them and give honor and give offerings and things like that to these spirits. And so the only way that you're going to be able to do that is if you have a practice that allows you to do that. So at this point, it's not an option because the spirits are over it, the earth is over it. And so we need to really kind of lock in and make things right. And so it's not an option, on top of the fact that our spirits, our ancestors and our spiritual court, they give us protection. And with the way things are right now, we need all the protection that we can get. Our ancestors are directly invested in our survival, because if we survive, then that means their legacy, their lineage, their bloodline survives. So if anybody is going to protect us, it's going to be our bloodline, our ancestors. And the only way that they can do that is if we tap into them, we give them offerings, and we connect with them. So again, ancestor veneration is not a choice. And if you don't have an ancestor veneration practice, I suggest you get on one ASAP before you do anything else, because that's another thing. A lot of people will go and bypass they will bypass their ancestors and immediately jump into an ATR or a diasporic traditional religion, and completely ignore their ancestors, completely not even dismiss them. And then they get into these practices, and then these practices, these readings that they're getting, are redirecting them back to their ancestors, right? And so again, it all goes back to the bloodline. We can't escape it. And so, if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling out of alignment, if you're feeling dystopic, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling lost in the sauce, then my suggestion is to start with your ancestors. Get your practice together, get that altar, get whatever, and start with that first to ground and center yourself, and then allow that to guide you where you need to go, right? And with that being said, there's no initiation into anything without the acknowledgement and blessing of your ancestors. But you don't need to be initiated in anything in order to venerate your ancestors. And I want to make that clear, right? Because I have been seeing a lot of, things popping up where people are acting like they can initiate you to your ancestors, or, do that, they can act as a medium to your ancestors, which, you can. I mean, I'm a medium. I talk to the dead. So yeah, I can tap into people's ancestors, but my approach is that I get people started, and I teach them how to cultivate that relationship, so they don't have to go through third parties in order to communicate with their ancestors, right? So ultimately, you don't need a third party unless you just need someone to kind of help you establish and be able to establish that communication. After that, you should definitely be able to get with your people on your own. They're your people. Nobody can tell you about your people better than you can. You know what I'm saying? So you don't need a mediary. You don't need a priest or anybody else you don't need to be initiated. You don't need someone else to set up your ancestor altar. You don't need someone else if you're doing an egun corner or getting an egun stick. You don't need someone else to set that up for you. Those are all things that you can do on your own. And that's another reason why I love this practice, because it is direct. It's you and your people. Now, yes, does it help to have people to guide you and to give you tips and, kind of tell you, point you in the right direction? Absolutely. But ultimately, once you get that footing, it's something that you can do on your own without anybody else. You know what I'm saying? And so because of that, it is empowering, and it's very it allows you to cultivate your discernment, your intuition. Um because, and that's another thing too, like, even though I do work with spirit guides as well, and I'm going to talk more about spiritism in a minute. I don't even suggest that people get into tapping into spirit guides before they have a solid footing with their actual ancestors, right? Because it's a lot more direct, meaning that you're less likely to get make mistakes, or less likely to trip up when you're just focusing on your ancestor veneration. So I want to talk a bit about spiritism, right? I want to touch on that a little bit in this episode. And the reason why is because, again, I'm sharing my journey, and my journey with venerating my ancestors transitioned into me practicing spiritism. And I will be honest, spiritism is not something that's for everybody. Because spiritism is a specific practice. So it originally came developed by Alan Kardec, who was an occultist. He was a French occultist, and it is a co-opt of indigenous practices and whatnot. But ultimately, he coined the whole spiritism thing. He wrote some books and whatnot, and basically, this was done during a time where you had different like Aleister Crowley and all of those like different esoteric orders were popular in those esoteric secret societies. And so a lot of them were obsessed with like seances and contacting the dead and working with demons and things like that. Now, spiritism is not about working with demons. It is specifically a practice where you tap into your spirit guides. And I will say that the difference between ancestors and spirit guides is that spirit guides are, whereas ancestors are people who were in your bloodline that passed on, spirit guides are people who were alive at some point that passed on, but they were not a part of your blood. They weren't related to you um, through your bloodline. Um, and for whatever reasons, the spirit decides to, stay and attach itself to somebody to help that person with their purpose or whatever, their growth or whatever they need to do in this lifetime, right? But, so it really, spiritism really kind of deserves its own conversation. But the reason why I'm talking about it in this conversation with ancestor veneration is because um, a lot of what comes up in spiritism blends into ancestor veneration. For example, a lot of times those of us who initiate into an African traditional religion, we may not necessarily have a family member that practice, but then we have a spirit that walks with us. That's a spirit guide that was a priest or a practitioner of that religion. And that spirit is what's giving us access to that practice, right? Or another example is a lot of times people have spirits that they can appear to be like ancestors, but when you further investigate, you find out that that spirit is a spirit guide that's passed down, like inherited, right? And that spirit has walked with the family for so long that it's damn near like an ancestor, right? I have something like that with my spiritual court. I have a pastor who's a part of my spiritual court that was also in my mom's court, even though my mother's alive, but we share this spirit guide, and I believe my grandmother shares a spirit guide as well. So this is in the part where the spiritism blends with ancestor veneration, but also too, when you incorporate spiritism, it does enhance your ancestor veneration. It enhances your own spiritual growth, right? So yes, it brings balance. It enhances your spiritual practice. it is very important for mediums to practice spiritism, because for those of us who have a natural gift for communicating with the dead, having a set practice with spiritism and being able to do things that allow us to connect directly with our spirit guides, it hones that gift, and allows us to exercise it and practice it and utilize it without like going crazy. Right. um and so again, with spiritism, and I won't get into too many details because this episode was not about spiritism, it's about ancestor veneration. But within spiritism, you do a lot of the same things. You set up a altar, we call it a boveda, with glasses of water. We light a candle, we keep a candle lit, we do prayers similar to when we do things with our ancestor. A lot of times some people combine their bovedas with their ancestor altars and have it as just one altar. And so that's a thing as well. Your spirit guides that come through when you work your boveda come in dreams, and they give you messages just like your ancestors do. They protect you and give you warnings just like your ancestors do. When you elevate them and you heal them, they're working in turn, working to help you and elevate you as well, right? So it does go hand in hand with ancestor veneration, but it's not required. Like, you don't have to practice spiritism and ancestor veneration, but it does, add that extra bit to it. And then again, the significance of it, like, it is another practice that can be practiced, that outside of a religion. So a lot of us who are initiated, are also, we're spiritistas, or we spiritists, not all, but a lot of us, right? And because of that, again, it's similar to ancestor veneration, where you don't necessarily you don't have to be initiated to have a boveda, right? There's no ceremonies that come out of bovedas and misas and things like that. It is a separate practice, and it is specifically about your spirit guides, right? So you're not gonna get messages and things about Orisha and Lua and things like that. Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be. And that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, it can be done in addition to, regardless of initiation or religious affiliation. And it brings clarity, it brings focus, it brings balance to your destiny and your spiritual path. A lot of times when and this hasn't happened in a while, but when I was first doing readings for people, I would get a lot of people asking me, well, I'm just here to figure out what the fuck am I supposed to be doing? Like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? What's my purpose? Whatever. And, those messages, I could never tell them what that was, because it wasn't my place to. Part of figuring out what your destiny is, it's a journey. And so if someone just comes in and tells you what your destiny is, that defeats the purpose, right? But what I've learned over the years doing my ancestor veneration and being, a spiritista, is that like attracts like, right? So remember when I spoke to spirits, spirit guides, when they pass on, they decide to attach themselves to people to help them with their journey. A lot of that decision comes from there being a vibrational match, right? There's something about that person that spirit recognizes, and that spirit is like, okay, I want to work with them, I want to help them, I want to elevate them, right? So when you start to really learn about your spirit guides, you'll start to see themes, and then those themes will give you clues as to what your destiny is, right? And I see that within my own spiritual court. I see that within my own spiritual court. And so, and I've never been one to question what my destiny is, or never wonder. I've always been like a person to, live life until I figure it out. You know what I'm saying? But those moments, but I have a lot of interest, right? I have a lot of things that pull me, and I'm pulled too. And so what's helped me narrow down what I'm meant to do is by studying my spiritual court and studying who my ancestors were, and then getting super focused on, okay, those themes, right? So so yeah, that's the beauty of it. And so that's been my journey. That's been my journey with the ancestor veneration and the spiritism that has led me to where I'm at now. And a lot of times too, when all else fails, um I always like, if I'm confused or I don't know what to do or things are just crazy or I'm having blocks or just whatever, I go and I sit with my ancestors. I go and I sit with my spirit guides. Like, yes, I have Orishas. Yes, I have Lua. Sometimes it's not even about them. Sometimes it's about just my spiritual court and working through it with them, right? Um so yeah. Yeah, that's my journey, that's where I'm at. And so I definitely, again, if you don't have a practice, I definitely recommend that you start one. So I want to close out this episode by sharing resources. Y'all know that I'm an educator, and I also try to put y'all on to as many resources as possible to further your practice. So for those of you who are interested in ancestor veneration and getting started, or who already have a practice but kind of are stuck, don't know what to do, or want to go deeper, there are a ton of resources out there. And specifically, I have a lot listed on my website, bethevibe.com. If you go to that website and click under the blog, I have one of the articles is resources, like spiritual resources. And so I list websites, I list books. There are teachers that teach classes on ancestor veneration and spiritism. It's all there for y'all. In addition to that, I offer classes. Hold on, I think I hear my toddler. Just a second. I think he might have woke up. Yes, that was my toddler. He is awake now, but I was able to buy myself some time and bribe him with some animal crackers and some juice. And that should give me just enough time to close out this episode. So, as I was saying, I do offer classes. I offer a lot of classes. So, I do teach 2 in person courses, one on ancestor veneration, the other one on how to connect with your spirit guides. And that class is for those who are local to Atlanta and can attend. So I teach those classes. I also offer an online 8-week class called Harnessing the Holy Ghost. And this is specifically a class that teaches spiritism, right? So it's an 8-week course that teaches people how to identify spirit guides, work safely with their spirit guides, set up their altars, give offerings, etc. So that class, I offer that in rotation. I may open that class up in early to maybe late spring. So if you're interested in any of those classes, you can go to the website. And then for those who are interested in the online course, just keep an eye out for the announcement when that registration opens up. Outside of that, I do offer one-on-one readings and consultations, helping people set up their ancestor altars, helping people to, teaching them how to give offerings, how to develop their connection, their communication with their ancestors. So that is a consultation. And or I do give ancestor readings as well. So all that information is on my website, which is bethevibe.com. And it is in the website is in the description of both the YouTube video and Spotify, whichever way that you're listening to this episode. So that is all, because I got to go get my baby. So thank you for tuning in. Plus, I didn't want to make this a super long episode anyway. I just wanted this to kind of be quick and whatnot. And just, again, go over or have a second discussion about ancestor veneration. Also, to kind of just use my journey as an example of how that practice can blossom and how it can evolve, right? So thank you for tuning in. I hope that you all are well and blessed and taking care of your spiritual, mental, emotional, physical health. And until next time, peace.